I don't know if we can talk to Larry Krueger because I'm being wooed by video of Marco Luciano's BP. Oh my gosh. He is very powerful. He is very, very powerful. Oh, I'm not allowed to salivate over a young guy? How many 49er fans have been doing it for Trey Lance for 3 years?
Well, our next guest has been doing it over Brock Purdy, and he was the first one to the Purdy party.
And he was right. And I tell him every time I see him, which was earlier today. Good to see you out at camp today. Larry Krueger joins us here on Willard and Dibs. Hey, bud, what's cooking?
Hey, fellas, how you guys doing? I got to say, on the Luciano front, I'm glad that Luciano was promoted, but Kapler's burying him in the 8-hole in front of Casey Schmidt. Something tells me he may not get pitches to hit tonight.
Well, yeah, with that's a fair point, but you don't want to pressurize it. What'd you want him to do? Bat third?
Well, that's a good point too.
All right, I mean, but anyway, hey, what'd you see out there today with regard to the quarterbacks? Did anything stand out?
What stood out is that there was an awful lot of 95.7 The Game employees watching those said quarterbacks.
Yeah, boy.
But, I thought Trey Lance looked really good. I mean, he's cleaned up his motion. He worked with this Jeff Christensen quarterback guru. He's holding the ball higher. So, he's got instead of having that big loop and holding it kind of mid-chest and looping it around and then releasing it, he's kind of holding it higher, and where the ball rests and where it comes out is in a similar plane, and I think he's streamlined his motion. And I wasn't sure, we still don't know about the power, guys, as far as, because a lot of the throws were within, let's say, 15 yards of the line of scrimmage. But I had him down as 5 of 6, and he did have one really nice long toss to Ty Davis Price that was impressive.
Yep.
So I thought Trey looked quite a bit better than Brandon Allen and Sam Darnold today. Not that those guys looked bad. I mean, definitely Allen was a little short on some of his throws, and he was he kind of underthrew a couple balls. Darnold I had as 2 of 4. But yeah, I thought Trey looked really, really good. And then after we talked to Debo and Kittle, and they both kind of seconded that thought and said that Trey really looks much improved from a year ago.
Is it tough to really rate these quarterbacks based on whom they're going against? Because, Larry, what I saw from all the quarterbacks and all the offense was a lot of checkdowns, because this defense, even without full pads and tackling, this defense is going to be nasty.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, the defense, even without Nick Bosa, Dibs, is this is a daunting defense with a really improved secondary and maybe the best, deepest linebacking core in the game. So it is hard to kind of, are we seeing a quarterback that looks great, but he's going up against the number 1 defense in football? Are we seeing a quarterback that looks good? And it's just, especially in the early part of camp where, I think more than anything, Kyle Shanahan kind of said it today in the post practice presser that, they have low reps, low expectations. It's really more like, let's shake the rust off, let's throw some patterns, and let's not get anybody hurt on the first day, because you always have that 1 or 2 guys that's trying to go at a breakneck speed, and I think they're just trying to ease into this thing a little bit.
Our guy, Larry Krueger, with us out at camp at 49ers facility earlier today and hanging with us here on Willard and Dibs. Hey, Larry, what do you make of all the talk about Brandon Allen? Not only Kyle bringing him up yesterday, but today sounding intent on keeping 4 quarterbacks. What do you read into that?
Well, Mark, there's no chance that they'll keep 4 quarterbacks, right? But they do like all 4 quarterbacks, and they're going to try to divvy up the reps and make sure they're giving these guys a legitimate opportunity. I kind of read it as Brock's the clear one, right? I mean, they've said a bunch of things, but I think the TK podcast, and I know you guys played some of that, so I was listening to you driving back from the facility. I think Shanahan kind of showed his hand there that, it's going to take a hell of a, basically he almost said without saying it that barring injury, Brock Purdy's the one. And then the more I look at this thing, I think there's a very good chance that Brandon Allen is going to be the 3. And it's just a matter of Sam Darnold and Trey Lance competing to see who's going to be the number 2. And the reason I say that also is cap related in that, yeah, the 49ers can afford to have $14 million if they decided, devoted to backup quarterbacks, if they decided to go with Lance and Darnold as the 2 and the 3 or the 3 and the 2. But they're staring at a cap situation next year where they've got a number of big price guys, and I think they would love to roll over a portion of their cap this year into next year so they could retain, as you said, Mark, Debo and Ayuk if they both went off this year. And so I think, they're going to they want the best quarterbacks they can find, but at the same time, they're going to keep one eye on their roster construction and their cap situation for next year. I just get a sense, now maybe I'm wrong because I've been wrong before, but I get the sense that it's Darnold versus Lance for that number 2 and number 2 job, and whoever loses that job might wind up somewhere else. That's just my sense of it, because they signed Brandon Allen to $1 million contract, which is right on par with what teams are paying their third string quarterbacks in the NFL these days. And so he slates in perfectly on the cap as a third-string quarterback. And I just think it's hard to picture them spending $14 million on 2 quarterbacks where neither starts.
So what does that mean in terms of what happens to either Sam Darnold or Trey Lance? What's the market for either one? And what would the cap hit be, particularly with Trey Lance, if they were to trade him before the start of the year?
Well, there's if they trade him, from what I understand, Dibs, it's not near the hit on the cap that it would be if they just simply released him. If they released him, they've got a significant hit. If they trade him, that hit is far less. I just think that when you look at the situation of $14 million, now they can afford it, right? Because they're paying Brock $840,000. It's not about can they afford it. Like, so if Sam Darnold and Trey Lance both play great, and they don't have, and let's say Brandon Allen doesn't play well, they could definitely keep all 3 quarterbacks, and then just next year deal with the cap situation on the team somehow by either kicking the can down the road for another year, redoing somebody's deal, or maybe even biting the bullet on some pricey guys like Kyle Juszczyk. But it just seems like when you look at what other teams are going to spend for their 2 and their 3, the 49ers will be spending almost 3 times what the average NFL team is going to spend on their 2 and 3 quarterbacks if they keep Darnold and Lance. Darnold has the 12th highest cap figure this year on the entire roster, and Lance is 5th. So that's an awful lot of commitment to quarterbacks. Now, they'll do it, I think, if there's no trade market that materializes. But I think if these guys play well, there may be a market for either or both.
Larry Krueger with us here, Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Okay, Larry, you heard it the other day. Steve Young said, let Brock cook. I think we need to let Larry cook. We need to let you kind of have one of your moments, which is tell us something about camp. Tell us something about a battle, a sneaky player who's going to play a big role this year that all of us regular folk know nothing about.
Well, Mark, I'll tell you one thing that was abundantly clear today, and I was hovering down by the defensive backfield group. They've really done a nice job there. Jair Brown, Deshaun Jameson, Samuel Womack, Diamador Lenore. I mean, they've got a handful of young DBs that are really going to make that defensive backfield competition, both at safety and at corner, really, really, intriguing. We didn't even see Darrell Luter yet because he's on the PUP, but he looked fantastic earlier in the OTAs. So I just think that the addition of Steve Wilkes, who's former DB at Appalachian State, he kind of, if you watch today's practice, he was running kind of the DB drills. He's essentially your DB coach. So he's letting Chris Koceric kind of run the D line, and there's no question that he's kind of running the secondary. And there's been an infusion of talent on the back end of the 49ers secondary, and I think that's the area that we're so used to the Niner line is everything, and they're a little questionable on the back end. Now you've got a first-string defensive line that may be better than the DeForest Buckner, D. Ford line that you had that went to the Super Bowl, and you have an infusion of top-tier young talent in the secondary. So that's exciting. If they can stay healthy up front, and I think you're going to see Steve Wilks, introduce some really good young players, and I think the secondary is going to start to rival the front.
And the front should be unbelievable. I saw Warren Sharp earlier rate the Niners front seven as number 2 in the NFL, just behind Miami, which I think they're better than Miami, but that just at least speaks to how good they're seen around the league. Larry, Brandon Ayuk, is he poised for just a monster year? And if he has as big a year as it seems like he's going to have, can the Niners afford to keep him?
Well, that's the beauty of the cap too. You can kind of keep everybody you want to keep, and you might have to make tough decisions on other guys. Kyle Juszczyk comes to mind, but I think that's the other exciting. If there's 2 areas of real excitement, for the 49er fans, it should be the infusion of talent in the secondary and now Steve Wilks. But then at wide receiver, I thought Brandon Ayuk looked terrific. And then Deebo Samuel is in the best shape that I've ever seen him be in. And I think you're going to see, 2021 Deebo, and maybe even a better version of Deebo than we saw in 2021. So Deebo looks great. Ayuk looks great. And then Danny Gray, is the fastest guy on the team. Kyle talked about it after practice. This is a guy that makes you defend that final third of the field. And Gray's much improved. So they've got a lot of nice players on the perimeter. They've got good depth at both corner and wide receiver, and that hasn't always been the case for this team. So I think if you say what's the most exciting thing, the most exciting thing is that Deebo and Ayuk both look like they could have career years in an offense that now suddenly has a ton of offensive weapons.
They're listening to 95.7 The Game, which was all over camp today for sure. KGMZ FM and HD1 San Francisco. Always live on Twitch, YouTube, and the free Odyssey app. Larry Krueger at 49ers camp earlier today with all the observations. Larry, I wanted to dive in with you on something that Dibs brought up, and I didn't really think about it until he brought it up earlier. But you and I were standing right next to each other when it happened, and I think it was on that play where Trey kind of broke down, the play broke down, and he took off running. Dibs goes, there's a different sound with the assembled fans when Trey does something well, as opposed to anything else that's happening on the field. Did you notice that, and how do you translate that?
Well, there's some excitement about Trey Lance, and I know some people would look at him, Mark, and say, "Come on, this guy's been with the team a couple of years now," but they drafted a very talented but a very uniquely inexperienced player, and now you're getting a chance to see that player. And I think there's a lot of fans that still have the dream that Trey is going to fulfill his potential. And I think he is. I think he is going to fulfill his potential, and you're starting to see, it's year 3, but you're starting to see glimpses, and there are people that are convinced that he's a bust, and I'm just not in that camp. I definitely think Purdy's their best quarterback, but Trey's got huge potential, and I think he's really going to play well in this camp. And the question then becomes this: how do the 49ers react to Trey playing really well? Because then there will be other teams around the league that have interest in a trade. Will they succumb to that and consider moving him, or will they be so excited by his potential that they'll say, you know what, no, he's going nowhere? And the only reason I think it's even an issue or even a topic is because I think the message of this offseason, and I've been saying it since February, is that they believe in Brock Purdy. They believed in him last year. Then they did a whole postseason evaluation. The front office did, the coaching staff did, and they believe in him that much more. And when they did the deep dive on last season, they realized this guy was fantastic, and that was one of the great performances that we've seen. So I think they went into this offseason saying, we're going to recommit to Brock, and we're going to see if there's a market for Trey. I think they found there wasn't a market for Trey, but they also held Trey's feet to the fire, and Trey got with Mahomes, got with Jeff Christensen, and has proved dramatically. And I think you're going to see that improvement in the preseason. And then the question is, how do the Niners react to that improvement? Do they say, hey, we got 2 franchise quarterbacks, and he ain't going anywhere. We've got injuries here. Let's keep him. Or does somebody offer them something that's really attractive? Because as Albert Breer pointed out, one of the ways they can kind of clear their cap situation is if they indeed move Trey. So I'm not rooting for it, but I think we'd be naive if we think that it's not on the table as one of the potential options.
That's a great way to put it, Larry, because I'm not rooting for it either, but I can't help but think about the future of the quarterback position with the 49ers, because you're not going to give a second contract to Brock and to Trey Lance. So if Trey can't beat Brock out this year, and I don't think that he can, and if Brock stays healthy throughout the year, which he might be able to do, what's the future of Trey Lance as a 49er?
Yeah, it's a great question, but I'll throw one more little, stat in there. Take away 2019, and the 49ers have gone 6 straight years where they've needed to use 3 quarterbacks to get through the regular season. So this idea that, what are we going to do with Trey? These things tend to kind of solve themselves. But, I think there's degrees to all of this. I think the 49ers are open-minded. If somebody wowed them with some awesome trade offer and they felt like they could get by with Darnold and Allen, I think they would consider pulling the trigger on a deal. I don't think it's totally crazy. But if Trey plays the way I think he's going to play, I think he's going to show so much ability that they'll be deathly afraid to trade him, and they'll keep him, and they'll just see how this season plays out before making any kind of finite or kind of definitive evaluation of what they're going to do with him.
I will say this. Our buddy Mike Silver, who was standing with all of us while all this was going on, has penned a new article. I'll just grab one sentence out of it, Larry. I'll grab one sentence, and then we'll let you roll, and we'll continue the discussion. One sentence. One thing is clear. Shanahan views Darnold as a potential star.
Wow. I'll say this. I haven't seen that, but I'm not in the meetings with the guy. To me, he seems inconsistent. I had him down as 2 for 4 today with a sack, and to me, he just looked okay. But I believe it, Mark, because they've talked him up. The players have talked him up. There's obviously they signed him before free agency even began. There's a conviction there with Sam Darnold. I watched on the All-22 all of his starts with Carolina. I didn't feel like I saw a quarterback that was coming into his own. But, Shanahan knows a lot more about this than I do.
Yeah, well, Larry, I tell you what, there's some really interesting quotes coming out of this that we're going to toss around with our listeners, which it sounds like you're one of them. Thank you for listening to us today, and good to see you, and thanks for calling in and hanging for a bit.
Hey, anytime you guys want to wrap on the Niners, I'll be at camp all summer. Let me know. Glad to jump on with you guys.
Nice.
Okay. Tomorrow would work. What are you doing?
Seriously.
Pick the time,
all right,
and we'll make it work.
Done deal. All right, there it is. Thanks, buddy.
Enjoy it.
See ya.
All right.